All right, welcome coaches to another episode of Coaching Youth Hoops. Today we have a special guest with us, Charley Dehoney. He is a former football player, so don't hold that against him, you hoop coaches. But I'm excited to hear Charley's story. He's a dad. He's an entrepreneur. He's a coach. We met because he used to use a product of mine back a few years ago, and we reconnected on LinkedIn through a post that we're going to talk about on a project that he's been doing for 3 years. I think it said, Charley, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. We started it, I want to say in 2019, and then we took 1 year off for COVID. So 4 years in, but 3 years of running the Turkey Bowl.
Awesome. So Charley, why don't you dive into who you are? I know you're a former Division I athlete, but maybe start your journey a little bit before that, how you get started. You have a pretty successful background in football and hold a record, school record, right, in track and field too, if I remember right.
It's since been shattered now, but yeah, I was a pretty successful field athlete in high school as well. But my background, really, I can't talk about my background unless I talk about sports. Both my parents were athletes in high school, and then I was one of 5 children, and as we started playing sports, my parents just completely got the bug, and was very fortunate to have parents who were always at the games and never missed. And as I got a little bit older and started playing basketball a little more competitively, my dad had started his own company, so he was able to become my basketball coach. And so a lot of what I talk to kids about, a lot of like my motivation to help kids comes really from both my folks. So all through elementary and middle school was a baseball, basketball kid. I was too big. I grew up in San Diego and they had Pop Warner football, so I was too big to play football, although everybody my entire life always told me, like, you need to play football. I walked on the field in 9th grade, and as soon as I started moving around, the coaches were like, holy cow, man, you have a future in this game. And I attribute it really all to playing basketball growing up and playing in competitive leagues and for my middle school team and rec basketball. And through high school, ended up being kind of an all-county all league type of a guy, was named to a couple of all-American teams. Wasn't recruited overly too heavily because I played left tackle for a non-passing high school and only had one scholarship offer coming out of high school. It was to Idaho State in Pocatello. So I played for the Bengals for a couple of seasons. I redshirted, and then I started a bunch of games my freshman year. And by that time, I was seeing a lot of my, former high school opponents and teammates from my all-star teams, playing in big schools on TV. And I knew that that's what I wanted. So in those days, this was pre-transfer portal. I left Pocatello in 1999, went back and joined a team at Palomar College in San Diego, which is a powerhouse football school. Was just really fortunate to play for Tom Kraft, who was an amazing coach, and a bunch of really great coaches, Steve White, my O-line coach. And we were on a team that was just loaded. We had a bunch of guys go D1. We competed for the state championship and lost. And so had the opportunity to get a bunch of scholarship offers after Palomar. I picked San Jose State because at that time they were really, really up and coming school. They were playing big teams every weekend on TV. My wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, happened to be running track at UC Davis. She was an All-American sprinter in college. Oh. And so Davis was 100 miles away from San Jose State. They were an up-and-coming program. I got to be on TV and spent a couple of just amazing years in San Jose, kind of developing myself. And ultimately, it's a great place to go learn how to be an entrepreneur.
Yeah, wow, wow, good for you. That's quite the background. And yeah, I would imagine the leap from playing football to being a startup in San Jose or working in startups was you were being around San Jose, right? And the school itself, it kind of guides you in that direction. And you're right, you were right in the heart of it. So what was your first kind of startup experience, and how'd you get bit?
So it actually, I went to work out of college. I wanted to be a tech founder, but this was 2003, tail end of the bus, the dot-com bust. I was like most college kids. I was broke and I had no skills. So, creating my own company from scratch really wasn't in the cards. So I was reading Forbes magazine. I saw some of the richest guys in the world started their career in outside sales. At that time, copier sales were kind of dying down, but I went and interviewed with about 40 companies up and down the peninsula in San Francisco, down to the South Bay. Anybody that had an outside sales training program, I went and gave them a look. I happened to land with a company that sold overnight shipping. They've gone on to become a multi-billion third-party logistics company now called Worldwide Express, founded by some amazing entrepreneurs that just had created this framework to hire ex-athletes and former, heads of fraternities and sororities. They'd run us through this really rigorous sales training program. And then I went door to door. This is right when eBay and Amazon were becoming household names. Yeah. And so I thought, parcel shipping, this might be something that takes off. Had no idea what e-commerce was going to do to the logistics and supply chain industry. In fact, in those days, it wasn't logistics and supply chain, it was trucking and shipping. So really cut my teeth with those guys. They had this amazing framework to identify the best and brightest people through your numbers. So they would publish these reports that would come out every Sunday. And, there's 250 sales people nationwide. And as soon as that report would come off, I'd print it off. I'd go sit down. I'd read it. How's this guy beating me? Why is this girl doing so well? What can I learn from this person? So that kind of like competitive nature and structured lifestyle that you learn in Division I athletics just fits super well into the Worldwide Express culture. But I was hired into a brand new franchise in Sacramento, of all places. And I started there. Within 6 months, I was hired by a former Division I college football player. Wow. 6 months in, he got promoted. So then I took over the office. I started hiring people older than me, 22, 23 years old. I was the key holder in the office. And so I was the guy that when they needed to open up a new market in Northern California, like I'd go find the real estate, I'd plug in the computers, I'd hire the first team. So I didn't know that I was working in a startup, but these were franchise based. So, small companies, I was getting them off the ground and, just got the opportunity about 3 years in. The guy that I was working for was out of the Midwest and he hated coming to California. And he said, look, I really like working with you. You're doing a good job. How about instead of a Christmas bonus this year, you take some equity in the company? So I got sweat equity at a young age, had my first exit at 25, had my second exit at about 28, 29. And then that's when I got off on my own, went back to San Diego, built and sold a couple of bootstrap logistics companies. 2012, I rode in an Uber at a startup event in San Francisco. And the first time I rode in an Uber, it changed my life because I knew that Uberization was going to take over transportation and logistics. Yeah. So I really wanted to get involved with that. And I joined the first Uber for trucking as employee number one. And then that set off a string of 10 years of early stage startup work.
Wow, that's amazing background. And I wanted to dive into that because, I think it's important, to talk about not only your sports background, but what you do because, as a coach, we're in a startup all the time, right? Especially with the young kids in the same, at a much lower level, but, into, how you can relate your startup experience, your college experience to what you're doing now as a coach. So, let's transition into that. And I definitely want to get into the Turkey Bowl, but so dive into when you started coaching, what you're coaching now. You said you had 3 boys, so I'm assuming you're pretty active. And with 2 Division I athletes in the household, right? Those your boys are destined to be probably athletes. So.
Yeah, so I started coaching probably at 10, 11 years old when my little brother started playing t-ball. My dad was an assistant coach, so he'd rely on me to come out and help out at practices. And as my little brother continued through his progress in sports, I always found myself helping out, and going to his practices. And then in high school, I became an offensive line coach for a couple of Pop Warner teams. One my little brother was on, one he wasn't. And then even throughout college, like I would find ways I spent a lot of time umpiring to earn extra money. And the umpiring is like, you're really coaching both teams. So I always had this passion for developing others because I had great coaches that developed me and really enjoyed that part of athletics. And then before my kids were born, I went back to my high school. This is post-college and I was well into my career. I went back to high school and I started coaching high school at my alma mater, Rancho Bernardo High School in San Diego. I started coaching the offensive line. And what was obvious to me at that time is my years as a sales manager and a sales leader was really the like kind of testing bed for becoming an athletic coach again, because the same things that I was coaching salespeople on, that I eventually coached athletes in, is the same thing I coach entrepreneurs on now in my current role, running a logistics technology accelerator and an angel investor. People need positivity in their life, and they need somebody that believes in them.
That's right.
And so when you're out coaching the kids, you don't make your team better necessarily by taking your 8s to 9s, right? It's when you can take that 2 or 3 and get them to a 5 or a 6. That's the rising tide that lifts all the boats. So, what I find is the same messaging applies to everybody, which is, you can do this. There are things you can get better at, and you don't deny those things. Face them head on. And most of the time, it's not any words of wisdom or any like expertise. It's just like a shoulder to cry on the rough days. And then once people are kind of over their emotions, just looking them in the eye and saying, hey, you can do this. Let's go. Tomorrow's going to be a better day. You're much better than you're giving yourself credit for right now. So remember that. If I believe in you, you should believe in yourself. Let's go. Let's do it together.
That's awesome, because it's one of the things that I always say too is 80% of what I do is coach confidence, and the other 20% is showing the kids how to put the ball in the hoop. Right. And if I can boost their confidence, and like you said, those, maybe those kids who aren't as developed as your stars, right? If I can just bring them up a little bit and boost their confidence, it's life-changing for them. It truly is. Even if they don't see, the court as much as someone who's a little bit better, but if they feel that they're part of that team and that experience, and, I always talk to them too, is your role also. And I know you want to play, but your role is also to lift the team and to put pressure on, and a good, healthy pressure on the kids that, maybe are getting a little bit more playing time. And that's hard. That's a hard lesson for a young, a teenager. I coach girls now, but I, coached boys before. And, that is a life lesson, right? And if they can learn those now, they're going to be set up for life. So
couldn't agree more. I mean, I think there's so much transferable skills that come out of athletics, and very few of them have anything to do with your athleticism. It's generally around mindset, work ethic, confidence, belief in yourself. And so those are the things that I really try to spend my time focusing on. And then as the kids turn 12, 13, 14 years old, I think it's important to start to become a little bit more realistic with them and help them understand that, hey, not everybody was born to dribble a basketball. If your place is in the post and that's where you can help your team, let's get down there. Let's get you boxing out. Let's get you rebounding. Let's get you throwing good outlet passes so you can help the team with, your God-given abilities that you do have. Yep. And let's not dwell on the things that you can't do.
Yeah, no, that's right on. And I want to, I just remembered something you had said too about, sometimes it's not the words of wisdom that matter. I remember my first day when I was coaching basketball at De La Salle High School with the famous Bob Ladouceur, right? Coach who's 200 plus wins in a row, right?
Sure.
National record. And I'm like, I mean, what a person to get advice from, right? So I approached Bob, I passed him in the hallway, and I said, hey, coach, it's my first day. This was, I don't know how many years ago this was, but I was younger. And I said, give me some words of wisdom. Like, I'm here. What would you say as a new coach? And he stopped, he thought about it. And I was just leaning in, and I was ready for hearing the best. I was even gonna, take my phone out and start writing some notes. And he goes, this is the best. He goes, be yourself. That's why you're here. And I'm like, and I was at first I was kind of let down, man, I was not, it's gonna get, okay, here are the 3 things you should focus on as a coach, right? And but and I stopped and I thought about that, and it took me a while, and I thought, that's actually really good advice. I was there because the head coach saw something in me, right? And he believed in me, and don't change that, right? You're there for a reason, and he brought you on for a reason. So I'm like, okay, that was pretty good advice looking back. Be yourself.
Well, I think everybody's looking for a silver bullet in sports and life and business, but that is the silver bullet. The silver bullet is believe in yourself, pick yourself up off the ground when you get knocked down, and keep going.
Yeah, that's right. Well, hey, let's talk about then. Let's talk about the Turkey Bowl that you organized. I was really fascinated because actually, I'm gonna pull this up, and I want to read something I think was really important. What you said, that this year is our third year organized our local Turkey Bowl, where kids come together on Thanksgiving to play flag football and make some new friends. And this is the key sentence: no coaches, no set plays, no complaining, and no drama. Just kids playing football before dinner is served. Now, and I'm sure you're a little bit younger than I, but when I was growing up, it's like, hey, you want to go play football? And we go out and play football. And we figure out the rules and we figure out who, teams, or hey, let's go play basketball. And pretty soon you got 10 guys just playing basketball. There's no coaches, no plays. You're working on your game. You might have watched an NBA game the night before, so you're trying some new things right from there. There's nobody yelling at you. There's, right, you're pushing each other and you're having fun. And you played for 8 hours, right, until
Right.
dinner time, and then you went home, right? And I think that, and I'm sure that was you put an emphasis on that, and because you took the time to write that. So one, let's talk about the Turkey Bowl, but I also want to dive into your thoughts on no coaches, no set plays, no complaining, and no drama, and why you specifically pointed that out.
Yeah, thanks for setting that up, and just thanks for having me on. Because this is something that I've become extremely passionate about. So, I have three sons. I live and die for their sports.
Yeah.
I'm
And how old
a
are your kids right now?
So my kids right now are 12, turning 10 this month, and just turned 7. So, I've got 3 boys. I'm right in the thick of, my 7-year-old is I'm coaching his first select baseball team this year. So I'm going to be coaching 3 select baseball teams this summer. I'm the head coach of 1 basketball team. My 7th grader, I just forced him to play basketball for his first time in his life. So I've got a 7th grade boys bronze team, which I've never coached a bronze team before, like the lowest level of competitive basketball. So I'm kind of learning how to adjust those muscles. But across all the sports I coach tackle football, flag football, baseball, basketball. And, there's so much drama in kids sports, particularly when you get to the select level. And it's very rarely the kids. It's always induced by the parents. And, as a lifelong umpire and coach, I'm the first one to stand up when I hear parents bickering at the umpires or the referees, because the reality is 99% of them have never gone out and officiated a single game. And so, that really cascades down to the kids. And what I see in my area, living out in just west of Omaha in a town called Elkhorn, is there's this, affluent suburb with a lot of like type A personalities, and everybody believes that their kid needs to be on the top select team in every single sport. I value the fact that Nebraskans, we moved there 4 years ago, and these people are committed to youth sports. There's a great infrastructure. A lot of kids play a lot of sports. But one thing that I think is missing since you and I were kids is just that good old fashioned rec team, where you show up, you get a t-shirt, you play 8 games, everybody got some equal playing time, and you're just there for fun. And so when everything moved to select over, I don't even know when, but everybody is in this competitive world now. I think a lot is lost in just free play. And like you said, trying new things and getting out there with your friends. And so years ago, I was living in Santa Barbara, building my second startup. And I lived in this neighborhood, this great neighborhood. And there was a local doctor named Dan Brennan who had 3 boys. They were older than my boys, but my oldest was on his youngest soccer team. And Dan was like this legendary AYSO soccer coach because he had coached all of his boys. He was also a local physician in town. So he just had this like great reputation in town. And when we were living in his neighborhood in Santa Barbara for a short period of time, he organized this turkey bowl. Of course, in Santa Barbara, it's outside. It's a beautiful day on Thanksgiving. And my kids were too young to play, but it reminded me of like how bad Thanksgiving Day sucks as a kid, because you're just kind of sitting there vibrating all day. There's not much to do. People are out of town. And I always admired Dan for starting this turkey bowl. So when I moved here to Nebraska, I decided, like, let's get the kids out in the neighborhood and have a little turkey bowl. And, I bought some trophies and some ref gear, and I painted lines in my backyard, and it just attracted a lot of kids. And so what started off as maybe, 15, 20 kids and a couple of games on that Thanksgiving Day 4 years ago, each year it started to build, and we've had to move it out of my backyard into a larger space. And so this year I said to my wife, like, I really want to invite all the kids, not just the kids from the neighborhood, the kids that I coach in all these other sports, the kids that I coach against in other sports. If I had their number, I had access to them, I put it out there, and I reached out to people in my professional network who I knew had kids that were local. And it just started to grow legs. And I realized it was going to be much bigger, and it was going to be pretty cold this year. So I approached the local training facility, and I rented out the training facility, and I bought bigger, better trophies this year. We expanded the category trophies. Trophies are simple. It's for the MVP, like the best player out there. That kid deserves to get recognized in front of all these kids. The best sportsman. If I see you pulling a flag and handing it back to somebody, or I see somebody knocked down, I see you picking them up, like that's valuable, and that's going to help you in life. And then this year we also added the Gunslinger Award for the top quarterback, because everybody wants to be Patrick Mahomes, and so we wanted to have that recognition. We also bought medals for the teams that won the tournament, just to create a little bit more competition. But the way that I organize it is all the kids get there about a half an hour early. I line them up smallest to tallest in 2 age groups. So you kind of, if somebody wants to do something like this, if you're going to have more than about 20 kids, or you're going to have ninth graders through kindergartners, you don't want the big guys running into the little guys, right? So we kind of split it up. It worked out to where like third grade and below was one division, fourth grade and up was another division. And we line them up smallest to tallest. And for me, it's critically important that they can't form their own teams and get cliquey like they do at school or when they're playing in the neighborhood. So I go down the line, I say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and I split them up into teams. And then I put everybody with their team. You have to go around the group. You have to introduce yourself and give everybody fist bumps or handshakes, so everybody knows everybody's names. And then I brought all the kids together. And the rules is something that I've realized, like, you have to have some framework and rules, because kids have so many interpretations, so many versions of the rules. So we based it off of the typical NFL flag that most flag football leagues operate off of, but we threw in some variations to match up what they do at school. And I had 16 rules. I got it printed out on a couple of big pieces of paper. So if anybody had any questions, we could point to the rules. I went through the first few rules. The number one rule is no complaining, no arguing. We're here to hang out with our friends and family and make some new friends. And then, you go through just kind of the basic rules: when you're down, what constitutes a score, how you can go for 1 versus 2. And then we just put them into games. We have a 20-minute running clock. We built some brackets. Once we knew how many teams we had, I had a big piece of butcher paper. We built some brackets, and we just tracked it through the tournament. We made sure everybody got at least 2 games. The winning teams played 3 or 4 games. And we asked everybody to stick around to watch the championship game. And afterwards, we hand out the awards. We had about 10 dozen donuts for the kids. We had, some beverages for the adults and some drinks for the kids, and played some music on a speaker. And it just was 3.5 hours of the most fun time that anybody could have. We had over 100 parents sitting on the sidelines watching the games. And going back to your no coaching, no set plays, there was a lot of dads out there that couldn't help themselves, and they'd be yelling into the kids like, hey, run this or do that. And some dads even said, hey, do you want me to go coach one of the teams? And so I'd remind everybody, like, this isn't about us, guys. Like, we're too old to play. This is for these kids. And it's important that they meet new kids. They play in unfamiliar situations, and they're here just for fun and to make friends. So that is
an absolutely amazing, coach. Congrats. That's so cool.
Thank you.
You're making an impact on those young lives, and I know it's not easy. You're taking time away from your family to go ahead and do that. So you said it was 3 hours. You had 75 kids this time. Hopefully we'll get 125 next year, right? And you outgrow that facility and have to run maybe 2 facilities, or maybe back in your backyard again. That is absolutely amazing. So what are some of the, like, if coaches that are hearing this and inspired to, maybe it's the turkey bowl basketball game, or maybe they want to do a football something, take their basketball players and turn them into football players, like, joke a little bit, but any coach out there who's like, oh my god, that's such a cool idea on Thanksgiving Day, or it doesn't even matter, like, what would you say? What would your words of wisdom? What did you learn over the last few years in organizing this and the outcomes?
So I think this is something that's replicatable. Like you can do a soccer tournament if that's what your sport of choice is and where your community is.
Mhm.
You can have a wiffle ball tournament on 4th of July. Certainly basketball has come up. We've thought about having a basketball tournament because Thanksgiving falls in basketball and Nebraskans are crazy about basketball.
Yeah.
But really, I think if you're getting kids together, my mind goes back to there's not enough free play anymore. My
Yeah.
kids are shuffling from one practice to one training to school tutoring to, I see the kids in my neighborhood from piano lessons to this, to that, to this, to that, to dance. And all these kids, boys and girls, life is so regimented now.
Yeah.
I think it's really important. It's incumbent on us as leaders and parents and coaches to remind them like sports are for fun. This is what we do for fun. No pressure on winning and losing. In fact, like when you and I were kids, like we'd keep score up until everybody forgot to score, and then you just kind of keep playing the game, right? So, I think if you're looking to put something together, you want to think very minimalistic in terms of the structure. Competition is about structure. You have to have some framework rules, but keep that list simple. Maybe don't even write them down. Just go through them with the kids. I think it's important to split kids up in a more organic or random way. If you tend to let kids, form their own teams, there's always going to be that last kid picked. And, I certainly know how that felt growing up, and I know other people do too. And so I think you want to kind of avoid that type of activity when you're looking to build community or foster relationships. And then I think one of the things I'll be focusing on in the future, there'll be two things that I'll really be looking to do is I want to diversify the pool of athletes that play in the Turkey Bowl in the future. I want to start reaching out to kids from neighboring towns. And we did a little bit of that this year, but I'm coaching tackle football and competitive basketball and competitive baseball against kids all across the state. And certainly there's other neighborhoods in Omaha that are much more ethnically diverse, economically diverse, or economically diverse. And so I'd really like to diversify that pool and start to open up this as an opportunity to kids from other areas to come learn, integrate, build relationships with kids from my community. And then the last thing that we're going to be focused on for next year is I'm going to pick a cause to support. And people ask me, because they knew that it cost me some money to do this.
Yeah.
And so everybody was asking, like, how can I contribute? Can I Venmo you some money? And for me, like, this is, I don't host a bunch of parties at my house outside of team parties. We don't do a bunch outside of our kids' sports socially for my wife and I. So this is our contribution to the community. So I'll cover the facilities, I'll cover the jerseys and the equipment. But I'm going to ask people to bring, whether we pick a charitable organization to feed a homeless family, or we raise some money for a local facility or an underprivileged youth sports program. I want people to feel like they're contributing to this event and make sure that this event is contributing back to the community in a more meaningful way. Outside of, I think, the relationships, the memories, that's what we're doing it for.
Yeah.
But since so many people wanted to have, some way of contributing, I want to make sure that we redirect that to the right organization. So I'll keep you informed on, kind of how we do that next year. And, maybe we could check back in a later episode on some other learnings. But, I would love it if somebody out there hears this and says, you know what, we want to do a World Cup for our neighborhood in soccer, or, we want to have a half court basketball tournament on, whatever it is that we do our own March Madness on St. Patrick's Day or whatever. It's about the kids, and it's about getting them out there and playing with unfamiliar people and just having fun.
Yeah, what is the end game of all of this, and what do you hope to achieve? I mean, you could, and I would imagine as a competitive player and coach yourself, right? You could easily get into this creep of, when right now it's like, hey, let the kids play, right? There's no set plays, no this, and you're like, this year will it's a set play, and you look at this thing 5 years from now, right? And my
thing is,
you know what I'm saying? You know what I mean by that? Yeah.
So a guy that I love that I coach, one of my dear friends that I coach, a very high level state runner up in majors, 11U or 10U baseball last year. And we've groomed a core group of kids over 4 years together. And the team is called Prime Red. And so the guy that I coach Prime Red with goes, hey, next year we ought to have a Prime Red team and let's let all of our baseball kids play in this tournament together. And I was like, no, like if I start letting one team organize, then the next thing you know, people are going to want to come in and bring their team that just shellacked everybody in NFL flag and won the city tournament. They're going to want to come in and enter. And if we're going to do that, we might as well just, sponsor a for-profit competitive flag football tournament. But that's really not what my goal is. So what started in my backyard and eventually outgrew. And then this year, I rented out the Elkhorn training camp, which is the town I live in. There's an indoor facility where people train for sports. So I rented that out, but they just expanded and doubled their footprint. The next side isn't even open. So next year I want to have 200 kids and I want to rent out both sides. And maybe we can have 4 divisions and have these kids play a little closer. Because we did have one of the kids that won the sportsmanship award for the older division. He was a 3rd grader and he was late to show up. So he got lumped into the 4th grade through 8th grade division. And he came up to me and he's like, Coach, can I switch teams? I'm not getting the ball. And I kind of looked at him and I was like, buddy, I'll get you in on one of the younger grades, but you're a good athlete. I know you. You can play with the big kids. I believe you can. So I let him get in the kindergarten through 3rd grade division. He scored a couple of touchdowns in that championship game because the kid had to go home. So he played a half in that game. And then immediately he was right back on the field with the big kids. And after building his confidence a little bit and letting him taste it, he was out there catching balls and pulling flags, smiling ear to ear. So that in and of itself was, he didn't complain. He didn't cry. He didn't want to quit. He went there, he did what I asked him to do, and he found success through that. So, I want to continue to just build these moments for these kids where they can take it with them. And if we have 200 kids next year and we need to rent out both sides of the facility, I'll gladly write the check and I'll gladly buy more trophies and more donuts to get those kids out there. So where are we in 5 years?
Donuts,
I don't know.
That's what they're
of course, man.
Donuts.
Of course.
Trophies.
It's part of it. It's part of it.
The donuts. That's amazing. There's in the Bay Area, or actually in my community, there's a very popular flag football program called MOL, and it's a sellout every year. There's limited coaching. I mean, there is coaches, but they have one practice and then they go and play, right? There are coaches, but it's just everybody go out and run and hopefully catch a ball, right? And it's one of the more popular programs that student athletes ref the games, and they get paid for it. And it's just a nice community event. I mean, you are paying for it. It's not like free for yours, but that is another model to kind of, it's not quite just open with no rules or no set plays and everything, but it's limited. You only got one practice, and how it takes more than one practice to run a football team. So that's awesome. I have a question for you. So you touched upon something about, again, you came back to this confidence thing, and we all have players on our team that, I'll take my team, for example. So we got JV and varsity girls, right? I have a player on my team who is too good for JV, not quite there yet, ready for varsity, but she is older. She's a junior, an amazing athlete, took some time off of basketball, and now is coming back to play basketball and just wants to play.
Sure.
Right?
Love it.
So, she's got to get her sea legs, so to speak, underneath her on the basketball side. But you had mentioned you had this 3rd grader play down, and so to speak, or his age level, sorry, and then came back up. What advice would you give coaches in similar situations? And let's move that up. Maybe they're coaching a junior high team or a high school team, because we got all listeners from all around, right? How do you give those types of players confidence in maybe more of a structured setting, like a high school setting or a grade school setting? I'm just curious.
Yeah, so I think this is an important message, right? I mean, I've had players both ways, right? Like when I was a high school player, my sophomore year, I was kind of that tweener. Like I was probably talented enough to play on the varsity team, but I wouldn't have been a starter. So I played on the JV team, and I just dominated and had the most fun year of football I ever played. Started both ways, had all these experiences. And towards the end of the year, the varsity coach, Damon Baldwin, who's now the head football coach at Ramona High School in San Diego, but he was also the offensive line coach in San Diego at San Diego State for many years. And he was coaching O-line at the time. And he invested really heavily in me, and just kind of like when I'd come up and practice with varsity, like reminding me before practice, like, you're here for a reason, dude. Like, you're going to be on scout team today, but I want you to go in and give those guys the business.
Yeah.
And so when I started coaching high school, I had this kid named Austin Luck, who was easily our most talented lineman, but he was a sophomore. And I think, he looked at himself as a JV player all day, but we needed him on varsity, and we weren't that good that year, my first year coaching. And I remember like reinvesting the same energy that Coach Baldwin had given me into Austin, and reminding him day in, day out, like, having a one-on-one, putting my arm around him while he's stretching and say, buddy, you got to give me everything you got today, because everything you got is every bit as good as anybody else out here. But if you don't go as hard as you can, you're not going to be able to show everybody that. They won't see what I see. So you have to constantly be reminding those people that are young and playing up, that they're supposed to be there. And I'm dealing with this with my middle son right now, who's a really talented athlete, plays 4 sports, on the top soccer team in Nebraska, one of the best baseball teams in Nebraska. He plays a year up in baseball. And each year I kind of revisit it with him, and I kind of ask him, like, hey man, like, if you want to go down and play with kids your age and hit 10 home runs like your buddy Caleb, like, you could do that. And I think I put enough energy into him over the years where he's now built himself up in his mind. He's like, no, Dad, I want to play majors and I want to play a year up, because he wants that level of competition, and he wants to prove that he can hang with those big kids. But he's got an older brother. And so, his older brother is on the opposite end of that spectrum. I mentioned earlier that, like, I'm coaching a bronze league 7th grade basketball team. Well, the way I ended up with that team is my oldest son wanted to stop playing football this year. He's always played flag football. He thought about playing tackle for his school this year on the 7th grade team. He kind of backed out of that, and I was fine with that. Football is not the sport that you need to be playing if your heart's not in it. So he thought he was going to be a 1-sport athlete at the ripe old age of 12, and his mother and I were like, no, dude, no, you're not doing that. So his mom signed him up for basketball, and it made him cry. He's like, I hate basketball. And he's on the shorter side, and never played basketball growing up. And so we got the note from the league that said, hey, your son's been assigned to a team, but there's no coach. If we don't find a coach, he can't play. And I avoided, like, the sucker in me who always accepts every coaching opportunity. I kind of avoided it because I didn't know how things were going to go with my son. And frankly, they play 2 seasons in Nebraska, one in fall, one in winter, take a break at Christmas. And so I wanted to be able to bow out for the winter season if he didn't like it. And after the 3rd email, my bleeding heart started thinking about the 8 other kids and how these guys are not going to be able to have a team. And man, we got out there in that first practice. I almost didn't even know what to do, Bill. Like, like, these guys couldn't dribble and chew bubble gum. And, we had a bunch of athletes on the team, probably had the highest GPA in the league, but didn't have a ton of talent. We had a couple of kids that really showed some signs. And one kid in particular, our point guard, he's a really, really good player. I don't know how he ended up on this team. But that first practice, he was dishing passes and they're flying through people's hands, and he's kind of like rolling his eyes. So I pulled him aside and I was like, hey man, like, our only chance to win some games this year is if you lead this team. And your body language is telling me everything I need to know. Can't even hear what you're saying because your actions are showing me everything I need to know. So I've really worked with our point guard to kind of bring him emotionally down to the level of the kids that physically are not up to his level. And he's really inspired the team to get better. And you see kids working harder because Jackson has taken a more vocal role. And I'm super proud of that kid because he knows he's the best player on the team, but he's not acting like it right now. And then conversely, I've got my son who on the very first day was easily the worst player. And so I've had to work with him on the other side and say, like, buddy, like, you're playing bronze league basketball. None of these guys are LeBron James. Like, you got to just try. So he's currently leading the team in rebounds. A couple of games ago, we won the opening tip, and I see my son, who's not the fastest kid on the team, but he's out there leading the break, and he catches the outlet pass and he goes up for a layup. And I just looked up in the stands, and my wife and I just were smiling ear to ear because you're seeing those little tiny, areas of progress that you and I both know, like, that's going to cascade into other areas of life much, much more than being the best 3-point shooter or the best, defensive player on the team. It's really his mindset that, hey, I can do this, and inch by inch, he's starting to put some things together. So this bronze league team is teaching me more than probably some of the better teams I've ever coached.
And it and it's probably, as serious as you are about coaching and the things you do, absolutely, right? It kind of humbles you as well and makes you think, okay, rethink how you have to teach the game and bring it down to the very basic level. I'm sure you walked in and you're like, hey, we're going to run the Princeton offense and we're going to, right? And they're like,
I
oh
was
boy,
hoping.
yeah, it's just
That's right.
ball goes there, right? Or Vince Lombardi, right? This is a football, right? So this is a basketball. A lot of times I start off the year with that too, and I tell the kids, this is a basketball, right? Meaning we still have to focus on the fundamentals. If you're not good at the fundamentals, it doesn't matter what play and scheme and tactics I run. If you can't dribble, shoot, pass, whatever, have your footwork right, it doesn't matter, right?
Absolutely. Or if that ball's rolling on the ground and you just sit and stare at it,
And
then
stare.
it doesn't matter, right? But I've had to use that analogy with the kids. The game is called basketball for a reason. This thing is the most important thing on the court.
That's right.
If you don't catch it, if you don't go and jump for the rebound, if you let it roll past you, we won't be a successful basketball team. So breaking it down is important, and just as important as helping kids level up when they're ready for that.
And we get one last question for you, because I think this is a really important one that we don't talk about too much in youth sports. You alluded to it a little bit, talked around it a little bit, but culture. Now, I know at Division I level, culture is key, and it's the difference between winning and losing. What about youth sports? You're just bringing, every year you got a different set of kids coming in, right, and moving around a little bit. How do you create like almost instant culture, right? Because you have to, because you got a season with these particular kids.
Sure. Yeah, so I think like the terminology I use about like the way I like to coach, and of course I'm not perfect. I have moments where I'm not as enthusiastic, or I'm more critical than I'd like to be looking back. But the term I use, especially about when I'm on a baseball field, people from a mile away can hear me because I use the term obnoxiously positive. And baseball in particular is a game where failure happens so frequently.
Yep.
And kids are so hard on themselves. I think in travel baseball, especially, it starts with, well, I paid $2,000 for you to be on the team, and I got you the $400 bat, and I better see you working, and I better see all these things.
Yeah.
And so, with my kids and my sons in particular, I try to really let other people coach my kids, because I know they're already hard enough on themselves, and they don't need their dad to remind them that they missed a ground ball. And then when I'm coaching other people's kids, it's so much easier for me to be obnoxiously positive towards these kids and recognize the small victories so that they hear this positive voice. And the other thing that I do just to build culture on the baseball field is, parents are pretty brutal in travel sports. They're kind of the worst part of the game. And what I see is parents show up and they coach their kid from the sideline and they cheer for their son. And if you just listen to them, you would think their son was the only player on the field. So I try to recognize and tip my cap or celebrate the nice plays and the achievements of the other team. Because what I want
probably
is
obnoxiously too, right? Just so
absolutely
those parents hear that. Yeah.
I want everybody to hear like, hey, this isn't a guy that's out there just like championing for his kid. He's not a homer that's looking for an edge and will slit your throat for an extra run. Like, I want people to see that like my commitment to youth sports is the future of our nation and the future of our community. It is not the future of my son or the future of my team. And so when you talk about culture, it starts with being ridiculously positive. And then, I think it is harder on the youth sports or the recreational sports where you're turning over your team on an annual basis, but particularly with the teams that I coach where we retain the same players, my tackle football team, my travel baseball teams, my competitive basketball teams. Culture is not something I talk about. Culture is what we do and how we do things. So it starts with like the exemplification of the culture. If I'm prepared, I can expect them to be prepared. If I have a well-designed practice plan, which I now found a new source for my basketball practice plans, then I can expect them to be prepared. Yeah. If I'm straggling in late, then how can I expect them to have their shoes on and ready to go? So I think it's really, culture is in business, in life, in athletics. It's how you do what you do. And the more you talk about culture, the more I think there's an absence of it.
Interesting. So that's really interesting. I think we should probably come back and talk about that a little bit more, because, one of the things that we do is I created what we call the red dot way. And it's a long story, and it's probably in one of these podcasts before, but it stands for, it's basketball related, right? Rebound, efficient scoring, defense, that's the red. And then the dot is, we talk about drive, open, and together. Okay. So at the end of every practice, the players give out literally red dot stickers, and I have a poster and that they put them on. And then at the end of the week, we look who's got the most red dots, and I have a little token that I give to the player. So I created wristbands and these little red smiley face squishy balls, right? Stress balls, right? And so I give those out. But what you said was, and so that's how we kind of like, because this is a brand new second year I'm doing this, right? And it has no culture before. There's no, like, I wasn't getting something like I did when I got in De La Salle. The culture was there, right?
Right.
And so, we're trying to establish a culture at the high school level in this particular case. So we created the red dot way, and everybody talks about the red dot. You literally get a red dot during game time between your thumb and your pointer finger, because it's a stress point where if they are under stress, and that's how it actually started. It was a little thing. There was a red dot, and I only had a red dot Sharpie in my bag, and I'm like, okay, everybody. And my son was a baseball coach or a baseball player, and one of his coaches told them about this stress point in between here, and put a red dot. Like, if you're struggling at the plate, right, next time, it's go in the dugout, squeeze this little thing. And of course, right, it's like psychological a little bit too, and goes out and hits, his best game ever, right? Just because he put the dot on his, right? So that's how the red dot culture started. But my point in all of that, and I think that's really important, what you said, is you have to live it. I have to live it, right? And it's something you got to work on every day. Just like you work on layups, you got to work on your culture. Would you agree?
You absolutely do. And I think what I love about what you're talking about here is it's not a set of words that you're saying.
That's right.
It's a set of actions that you're taking. So by reducing all of these important overarching themes down to a simple acronym, red dot, what you're doing is you're taking a whole bunch of ideas and making it super simple, so that when you say red dot, it means so many more things.
That's right. Yeah.
And everybody knows when you're talking about, hey, that's not red dot. They know why, right? And so it simplifies your communication, but more importantly, like, you're building up this rhythm and this cadence of, hey, we're going to come back together and we're going to talk about our performance in terms of the red dot framework.
That's right. Yep.
When we're red dot approved, we're going to hand out the goodies. When we're not red dot approved, I'm going to tell you why. But I think these are important things that, too often people are like, I see it in business all the time is, we want to come up with our core values and we want to do these things as a leadership team. Well, look, like, why don't you live it for a while? Why don't you see what bubbles up from the organic organization, and then bring some people into the room and summarize those things, but don't just put them on a wall. You've got to exude these things. You've got to live these things every day. So I commend you, Coach, for putting that out there for your kids. And I think, long-term, like, you're probably like me, like, if 20 years down the road, one of these women comes and talks about red dot and what that means to them, that's going to be all the validation and all the gratification you could ever ask for out of life.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Our job is, we get paid long-term, the kids we coach, they're not
exactly
like getting it, right. But I know, because I lived it as a sport, as an athlete, thinking, oh, it's like that light bulb went on way after high school was over and I was done playing sports. And I'm like, okay, that's what coach discipline. Oh, okay. That's what coach was talking about. Being on time means being 10 minutes early. Oh, okay. And here is, the big bad coach punishing us for being late. It's like, okay. Thank
And
you.
you realize how far that goes. And one last point that I'll make is about that acronym is it brought to mind an acronym that I played for this legendary coach in San Diego for the last year of my high school career, Ron Hamamoto. And like many coaching transitions, we had a brutal season that first year because culturally he was bringing in his stuff and we were kind of yearning for the days before. But Coach Hamamoto, like I've gotten along with every coach I've ever had because I can take the good and you can look past the bad. And I just think like, I appreciate being coached. And when your coaches stop talking to you, that's when you have something to worry about as an athlete because they've given up. But Coach Hamamoto had this acronym, WIN, what's important now?
Yep.
And it carried me through college. And there was times when, you want to go to the party, but you have the paper due and you know that, you want to get up early to work out tomorrow, but there's this other opportunity to go do this other thing. And I would always remind myself what's important now. When I was building my first company that I started on my own in San Diego, and I was bootstrapping this company, I remember just as an entrepreneur, you have a million things. There's no shortage of work, but sometimes you run out of plan and then you get overwhelmed because you're like, what do I do next? And I remember reminding myself what's important now. And then you start to prioritize your high value activities. What's going to put money in the bank tomorrow? What's going to help me feed my family? What's going to keep my customers happy? And it just brings clarity when there's lack of it. So I really commend you for like what you're doing with those girls. And I look forward to staying in touch and just hearing how this culture evolves for you. And, I think it sounds like you've got your emphasis and your focus in the right place. So I'm excited for you.
Well, I appreciate that, Coach. And Coach, amazing. You keep up the good work, change those kids' lives too. You're doing an amazing thing for those kids, short term and long term. It's absolutely inspiring. You make me want to go out and do more. So I appreciate you. I appreciate your time. And please, I am sure, I'm positive that I'm going to we got to get Charley back on this podcast. So start thinking about the next topic we got to dive into. Maybe it's culture, maybe it's some of these other things, but I really appreciate you time. We could talk, I think probably for the next 2 hours about this stuff. And
I agree.
All right, sir. Hey, Coach, thank you so much. Blessed to have you on today on the podcast and much success to you and your teams. Thank you.
Appreciate you, Coach. Take care.